There's a house just past the edge of Wytheridge Lane, where the road narrows and the forest thickens. It doesn't appear on any recent maps, though it's been there longer than most of the town remembers. It's a modest two-story home with grey shingles curled like peeling bark and a porch that creaks even when no one walks across it. The windows are always dark, except at night. Sometimes, just after 3 in the morning, a soft orange light flickers behind the upstairs curtain. Lena Caldwell didn't notice it the first time she passed. She was too focused on the GPS, trying to navigate through unfamiliar streets as she moved into her new apartment. The house sat back off the road, half concealed by crooked pines, hunched like a figure trying not to be seen. She had just taken a job at the university library across town, cataloging, mostly, and handling the special collections when they needed extra hands. Lena liked quiet things, books, rainy days, overcast skies. The hum of city life had always been too loud, too sharp. So she moved to Grenton, a sleepy town that barely qualified as a dot on the map. Her new apartment was modest, like the town, a second-floor unit in a narrow house divided into 3 rentals. The landlord, Mr. Garris, was a kind man in his late 60s who wore flannel year-round and smelled faintly of tobacco and cinnamon. "Place has good bones," he told her as she walked through it the first time. "No ghosts that I know of." They both laughed. The first night was uneventful. Lena unpacked until she was too tired to stand, then made herself tea and sat by the single window in her living room. Outside, the forest loomed dark and quiet. The only sound was the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional click of the old radiator. But on the second night, the knocking began. It was faint. Soft. Just 3 slow knocks against the wall behind her bed. She sat up immediately, heart drumming, the room dimly lit by a bedside lamp. Knock. 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 She waited, breath caught in her throat. Nothing followed. No footsteps. No voice. Just the slow tick of the clock on the dresser. She pressed her ear to the wall. Silence. Maybe pipes, she whispered to herself. Old buildings make sounds. Still, sleep did not come easily. She left the lamp on until dawn. The next night, it came again. Knock. 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 This time, it came from the window. Lena froze in bed, her sheets pulled up to her chin. The room was quiet except for the hum of the radiator and the low wind outside. She didn't move. The window was behind her, a single pane with thin white curtains that fluttered slightly. She turned her head slowly. Nothing. No shape. No shadow. Just the window and the trees outside. She got up, heart pounding, and stepped to the glass. Cold air seeped through the frame. The woods beyond swayed under a cloudy moon, and the sky held no stars. She pressed her forehead gently to the glass, then exhaled. A faint fog spread across the pane. Suddenly, a shape passed in the reflection. Lena spun around. No one was there. She didn't sleep that night. The 4th night, the knocks came again, not at the wall, not at the window, but at her bedroom door. 3 slow knocks. Exactly at 3:17 a.m. She sat upright in bed, eyes wide, breath shallow. "Who's there?" she called, her voice unsteady. No answer. She reached for her phone, thumb trembling as she checked the time, 3:17. Lena slipped out of bed and approached the door. Her hand hovered near the knob. Silence. No footsteps. No creaking floorboards. Just the faint breathing of the building, the whisper of trees against the windowpane. She flung open the door. Nothing. Empty hallway. She stood there for a long time, then turned on every light in the apartment. The next morning, she found a small piece of folded paper just inside her doorway. It was yellowed, soft at the edges, and handwritten in faded ink. Thank you for listening." Lena didn't know what to make of it. She checked her locks, tested the windows, asked Mr. Garris if anyone else had keys to her unit. He frowned. "Just me," he said. "And I haven't been up there since you moved in." "Why?" "No reason," she lied. But something had changed. Something was watching. The library at Grenton University was older than the campus itself. It had once been a monastery before it was converted during the 1800s, and the stonework still bore strange, circular markings that no one had ever been able to fully identify. Lena had always liked the place. It was quiet, dignified, full of secrets. But lately, even the library seemed different. On Monday, she arrived early and found the back room, the one with the old archive cabinets, unlocked. It was usually sealed except by keycard. Inside, the air was colder than usual, the lights flickering slightly. She was sorting through a batch of hand-bound volumes when something slid off the shelf behind her. A thin book. It hit the floor with a dull thunk. She turned and picked it up. The spine was brittle, unmarked. She flipped it open. There were no printed words, only handwritten scrawls in fading ink. Latin, maybe. Or something like it. But one phrase caught her eye. It had been written in English, underlined 3 times. "They knock to be remembered." The hairs on her neck rose. She stared at the book. The handwriting was eerily similar to the note she'd found. That night, she brought the book home. She shouldn't have. The book sat on her kitchen table like it had always belonged there. Lena didn't remember setting it down. She didn't remember opening it. But now, its spine was cracked wide, its yellowed pages fanned like the wings of something ancient and waiting. The phrase haunted her. They knock to be remembered. Remembered by whom? Forgotten by what? She ran her fingers over the ink, the loops and jagged slashes of letters. Whoever had written it had done so feverishly, almost angrily, as if trying to claw something from memory before it slipped away forever. That night, she dreamed of knocking. She stood in an endless hallway, doors on both sides. Each door had a name carved into it, and one by one, they knocked, soft, patient, pleading. Her hands trembled. Her mouth was dry. She moved toward a door with no name. It burst open. She woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The book lay open beside her in bed. She hadn't brought it there. At exactly 3:17, her apartment went ice cold. This time, the knocking came from inside the walls. The sound circled her, wall to wall, floor to ceiling, like something moving just beneath the plaster. She grabbed the book, turned on every light, and paced until dawn. She didn't go to work the next day. Instead, she stayed home, poring over every word in the journal. There were more English passages scattered through the strange symbols. They come to the listeners. They come to the willing. Once you hear them, you belong to the hush. And to answer is to open. To open is to become. The phrases burned in her mind. She tried calling Dr. Hirsch, her supervisor at the library, but he didn't pick up. When she checked her email, she saw no record of her having checked the book out. In fact, the library archives had no record of that room at all. Lena knew she wasn't imagining it. She couldn't be. That night, the knocking didn't stop. It started at 3:17. Soft, slow knocks. Then again at 3:18. Then 3:19. She stuffed towels under the doors, turned the TV on loud, plugged in headphones, but nothing drowned it out. It was inside her skull. Her heartbeat aligned with it. Knock. 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 She threw the book into the garbage. It was back on her pillow by morning. Lena called the university again the next morning. This time, someone answered, a secretary named Mara with a soft voice and a thick regional accent. "Dr. Hirsch isn't in today," she said. "Called in sick. Did you need to reschedule?" "Yeah," Lena murmured, her eyes fixed on the book now resting in her lap. "Just, let him know I found something in the archives." "An unlabeled book." There was a pause. "We don't have any unlabeled books." "I know," Lena said. "That's why I need to speak to him." Another pause. "This time longer." "I'll pass it along." Lena ended the call and decided to go to the university in person. Maybe seeing the space in daylight would ease her nerves. Maybe she'd find something she missed. She entered through the west wing, bypassing the usual staff entrance. The hallway to the archive room was cold, unnaturally so. The light buzzed overhead. When she reached the door, it was locked. No keycard panel. Just an old brass doorknob. That hadn't been there before. She pulled. It didn't budge. But someone was watching her. She felt it. Behind her stood an older man, tall, thin, with gray hair pulled into a short tail. His eyes were dark, almost black. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked. Lena backed away a step. "Seen what?" "The book. The one that wasn't meant to be found." "Who are you?" He smiled sadly. "I used to be the archivist. Until I opened something I couldn't close." He reached into his coat and handed her a faded photo, the same book on a desk, open to the same page with the underlined phrase, "They knock to be remembered." "Don't read it out loud," he said. "Don't speak to them. And whatever you do, don't answer." That night, Lena tried not to sleep. She stayed awake in the living room with every light on, the book locked in a metal box, the box stuffed into her closet. But at 3:17, the lights flickered. Knock. From the ceiling. She looked up slowly. The sound had moved. It was above her now. There was an attic in the building, she remembered Mr. Garris pointing it out during the walkthrough. "Don't bother going up there," he'd said. "Just insulation and dust." But the sound was coming from it. Not just knocking now, but shuffling, soft dragging. Lena grabbed her phone, turned on the flashlight, and opened the hallway door. The attic hatch was at the end. The ladder was down. She hadn't seen it earlier. She would have noticed. Would have remembered. Her light trembled as she aimed it upward. The hatch door was ajar, swinging slightly, as if recently disturbed. She climbed. Slowly. One step at a time. The attic was cold. Colder than any part of the building. Dust coated everything. Boxes, old furniture, insulation torn in places. Then she saw them. Handprints. Dozens of them. Smudged into the dust. Small, long-fingered, misshapen. One was wet. She backed down the ladder without looking up again. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, every mirror in her apartment had fogged over. She hadn't taken a shower. The windows weren't open. But each mirror held a fine mist, and in that mist, faint words had been written. "We remember you." Lena scrubbed them clean, but they returned. "Let us in. Almost time." She covered the mirrors with towels, threw the book into a metal lockbox, and placed the box in the trunk of her car. Then she drove it to the far edge of town and buried it in a shallow grave behind a shuttered gas station. When she returned home, it was on her kitchen table. Open. Lena didn't touch the book. She didn't scream. She didn't even blink. She backed out of the kitchen and shut the door. The air on the other side felt thicker, charged with something she couldn't name. Her ears rang with a low hum, as though a presence had taken root in the walls, vibrating through the bones of the building. She stayed locked in her bedroom until morning. When the sun rose, the kitchen was empty. The table bare. No book. She started recording everything. Each night, she set up her phone on a tripod, recording sound and video from the living room. She left lights on, and every morning, she reviewed the footage. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Only the faint creaks of old wood, the distant rush of wind. On the 4th night, at 3:17 exactly, the screen filled with static. Just for 7 seconds. Then it returned, but something had changed. A shadow moved across the floor, too slow to be human. It glided. Dragged. And then, clearly, unmistakably, a whisper. "She hears us." Lena dropped the phone. She called the old archivist. She didn't have his number, but she remembered the card tucked inside the photo he gave her, yellowed cardstock with a handwritten name and a landline. He answered on the first ring. "I hoped you wouldn't call." "They're speaking now," Lena said. "In my apartment. In recordings." They moved the book. Silence. Then, "You've crossed the threshold." "What does that mean?" "They've marked you. You're not just a listener anymore." Lena gripped the phone tighter. "How do I stop it?" "You don't," he said. "You contain it. Delay it. And maybe you don't open the door all the way." He gave her an address, a private records facility miles outside town. "Meet me there at midnight. Bring the book. If it'll let you." Lena didn't ask what he meant. She didn't have the strength. The GPS lost signal 10 minutes into the drive. The road narrowed as tall trees closed in, branches curling overhead like skeletal fingers. Her headlights flickered once. Then again. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel. The box containing the book sat in the passenger seat. Every now and then, she thought she heard scratching inside, light, deliberate. Like fingertips tapping. The facility was hidden behind an overgrown chain-link fence. The gate creaked open as she approached, though no one was there to open it. The archivist was waiting near the front entrance. His face looked paler than before, drawn thin, his eyes rimmed with red. "You brought it," he said. "It followed me," Lena replied. They went inside. The lights flickered once and then stayed steady. The interior was vast, full of floor-to-ceiling shelves. Most of them were empty. "It's not just a book," he said. "It's a gate. A tether. And you've become the key." Lena followed the archivist down a long corridor lined with thick concrete walls and cold tile. The air grew colder with every step. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To the place it came from," he said. "Before it became a book. Before it became memory." They stopped at a rusted metal door marked with sigils Lena didn't recognize, swirls, circles, harsh slashes that seemed to vibrate when she looked at them. The archivist unlocked it with a heavy key and pushed it open. Inside was a chamber lined with mirrors. Dozens of them. Each one cracked or covered partially in soot. Some of them pulsed. In the center, a stone pedestal. And atop it, the book. Not the one she'd brought. Another. Identical. "There's always one copy too many," he said quietly. "They replicate. They need new hosts. New listeners." Lena stared at the pedestal. The book began to open. She stepped forward despite herself. Her breath fogged the mirror nearest to her, and in its haze, a face appeared. Her own, but not. It blinked too slowly. Smiled too widely. Its mouth moved without sound, mouthing something she couldn't hear. Couldn't hear, until the book turned a page. And then the voice was behind her. We waited. She spun around. Nothing. Just the archivist, still watching, sweat beading on his forehead. "Don't let it speak your name," he said. Why? Because it's not yours anymore. The mirrors darkened one by one. And from them, silhouettes began to emerge, like smoke leaking into the room, forming limbs and hollowed heads. Lena stepped back. The whispering rose. She opened the door. She let us speak. She hears. The archivist stepped between her and the figures. Get out, he hissed. Run. I'll hold them. Lena didn't want to leave him, but something inside her, something primal, knew the door wouldn't stay shut for long. She turned and fled. The hallway behind her warped. The walls stretched, flexed like lungs inhaling. Lights burst in a staccato rhythm. She ran, clutching her phone, the recording light still on. When she looked back, the vault door was gone. Just smooth wall. And silence. She drove home in numb silence. When she arrived, the apartment door was open. Everything inside had been turned upside down, furniture broken, walls scraped with the same symbols she'd seen on the vault. The smell of burning paper hung in the air. The book was on her bed. The original one. And it was glowing. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every hour past midnight, something knocked, at the walls, the ceiling, the door, her mind. The whispers grew louder, not spoken but echoed in thought. And the phrase returned again and again. They knocked to be remembered. The mirrors remained fogged. Her recording showed images she hadn't seen in real time, a figure standing over her sleeping body, its face featureless, its presence undeniable. Lena began to change. Her thoughts weren't entirely her own. Sometimes she'd write things she didn't remember writing, fragments of incantations, languages unknown. Sometimes, she spoke aloud while sleeping. Once, she woke to find herself standing at the window, whispering, "Come closer." The archivist didn't answer her calls. His number went dead. In desperation, Lena turned to Mr. Garris, her landlord. He listened patiently, his brow furrowed. Then he stood slowly. "You should come downstairs." He led her to the basement, to a back wall she'd never noticed before. Behind a shelf, he pried away 2 wooden panels. There was writing there. Old, faded. And one phrase repeated over and over. "The listener lives here. This place chooses them," Garris said. "Always has. Sometimes it's quiet for years. Then someone moves in, and the knocks begin again." Lena stared at the wall. "I didn't choose anything," she said. Garris shook his head. "But something chose you." The next night, the knocking returned with new rhythm, not in 3s, but in 5s. Urgent. Demanding. It came from all sides now, the windows, the floorboards, the mirror she forgot to cover. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her limbs were heavy, as if submerged in cold water. At 3:17, the mirror cracked. Just one jagged line across the middle. A voice whispered from the fissure. "One of us now." Lena opened the book the next morning. She didn't remember doing it. But there it was, open on her lap. The page had changed. There was a map now, a crude, hand-drawn sketch of her neighborhood. One spot was circled in red. A place she'd never been. At the bottom of the page. Where the first knock fell. She felt compelled. Drawn. The red circle led her into the woods behind her building, farther than she had ever dared go. After 30 minutes of hiking through thorns and overgrown brush, she found it, a clearing with a single, dead tree in the center. Carved into its bark. "Remember U.S." And at the base, something buried beneath disturbed earth. She dug with her bare hands. She found a jawbone. That evening, she went to Mr. Garris, trembling. "I found something," she said. "A bone. Behind the building. He didn't act surprised. I warned them not to build here, he said. But they did it anyway. Covered over the old house. The place that burned down. What house? The original Wytheridge house. The one where it started. The first listener lived there. Lena swallowed. What happened to them? They knocked until someone let them in. Lena dreamed of a room filled with candles. Hundreds. Each flame flickered in rhythm with a heartbeat. She stood in the center, surrounded. A shadow moved between the lights. It had no eyes, no mouth, just folds of skin that twitched as it breathed. You burn too brightly, it rasped. She awoke screaming. There was wax on her fingers. That night, Lena heard footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. Not the usual creaks of an old building, these were deliberate. Measured. She peered through the peephole. No one was there. But when she looked again, the hallway seemed longer. Stretched. Endless. From the far end, figures began to emerge. Pale and faceless, their movements jagged and unnatural, like marionettes on tangled strings. They stopped outside her door. They didn't knock. They whispered. She listens, she listens, she listens. She played back her video footage the next morning. Her phone trembled in her hands. 3:17 a.m. The door in the video opened on its own. Slowly. Deliberately. The frame shook as if something large had passed through it. And then, standing in the center of the room, was Lena. Not asleep. Not dreaming. But watching the camera. Smiling. And whispering. We remember. Lena returned to the university to search records on the Wytheridge house, hoping for proof she wasn't the first. In a locked cabinet in the genealogy section, she found it, a manila envelope, unmarked. Inside were photographs of the original house. It had burned down in 1921. The final photo showed a family, a man, a woman, and a child standing in front of the porch. The child's face was scratched out. On the back, the listener's bloodline must not continue. Lena began seeing him everywhere. A tall figure in a black coat, standing still at the edge of her vision. On street corners. Outside shop windows. Once, reflected in a puddle. He had no face. No features. Just smooth, blank skin. When she turned to look directly at him, he vanished. As if peeled from existence. But each time, he got closer. One night, Lena tried speaking back. When the knocks came at 3:17, she stood in the center of the living room and said, "I hear you." Silence followed. Then a sigh, not from her lips, but from everywhere. A deep, ancient sound, like breath drawn through stone. The temperature dropped. The lights went out. And then came the voice, not in her ears, but inside her head. "You're ready." Lena woke with a burning sensation on her arms. When she pulled back the covers, she found red lines etched into her skin, not scratches, but symbols. Familiar ones. The same shapes she'd seen in the vault. In the mirrors. They weren't bleeding. But they pulsed faintly, like something beneath the skin was alive. She tried washing them. Scrubbing. Nothing worked. When she stood in front of the mirror, they glowed. That evening, Lena received a package. No return address. Inside, a second journal. Bound in the same cracked leather as the first. This one was written in the same jagged script, but much more fragmented. The entries weren't dated, but each began the same way. For the next listener. She read it cover to cover. It spoke of visions. Of sacrifices. Of names never spoken aloud. Of a place in the woods where the veil was thinnest, where remembrance took root. At the final page, a question had been scrawled in shaky ink. When the knocking stops, what takes its place? She sought out help, a woman known as the seer, who lived in a trailer at the edge of the old quarry. Townsfolk whispered about her but never said her name. The seer opened the door before Lena could knock. "I've been waiting," she said. "You carry their shadow." She led Lena inside and gestured for her to sit. "They chose you because you answered," the seer said. "Even silence is a kind of answer." Lena asked what she could do. "How to close the door for good." "You can't," the seer replied. "But you can turn away from it. They want to be seen. Starve them of attention." "But they're already in me," Lena whispered. The seer's eyes narrowed. "Then you must choose, be their voice, or bury it forever." Lena made ready. She copied the protective symbols from the second journal and marked them across the walls, on her skin, beneath the soles of her shoes. She wrapped the original book in chains and salt-dipped cloth, then sealed it in a lockbox beneath the floorboards. For 3 nights, nothing came. No knock. No whisper. No dream. On the 4th night, the journal began bleeding ink. Dripping down the sides, pooling on the desk. She knew, the final attempt was near. At 3:17, the air thickened. Lena stood at the center of her apartment, every candle lit, every mirror covered, every ward humming faintly with power. She wore the symbols. She recited the names. She held the second journal in her hands. The knocking began. First at the door. Then the windows. Then from inside the walls. Then, at last, from within herself. She screamed, not in fear, but in defiance. She opened the second journal to the final page, the one with the ink still wet, and whispered. "Not remembered. Not opened. Not yours." The apartment shook. The walls cracked. The flame of every candle turned blue. And then, everything stopped. She fell to her knees. The knocking was gone. Lena stood in the clearing long after the fire died. She could still feel it, the heat, the trembling, the echo of something ancient forced back beneath the soil. Her hands were blackened with soot. Her voice hoarse from chanting words she didn't remember learning. But it was quiet now. The knock had stopped. And yet, she knew it wasn't gone. Just, waiting. Buried. She turned toward the trees. Behind her, the clearing darkened, shadows reclaiming what had been lit. She didn't look back. The days passed without incident. Lena returned to her routines. Working, eating, walking the edges of town. She began sleeping through the night, something she hadn't done in weeks. The mirrors stayed covered. The journal remained shut, sealed inside a locked drawer. But still, she kept listening, for the wrong creak of a stair, the breath of cold that wasn't from a draft. She never heard it again. But she felt it. In the spaces between her thoughts. In the stillness between footsteps. A quiet presence that was no longer chasing, just watching. One quiet evening, Lena opened Eliza's journal again. It had been untouched for weeks. The pages brittle, yellowed with age. But when she turned to the end, a new entry had appeared, one written in her own handwriting. "You've turned back what cannot be stopped." But for how long? She didn't remember writing it. Her hand hovered over the page. The ink was still drying. She heard a whisper. Not the end. Never the end. Cracks began appearing in the walls of her apartment. First in the corners. Then beneath the baseboards. Small, almost invisible, but spreading. At night, she heard faint scratching behind them. Like nails on stone. She reported it to her landlord, who shrugged. "Old building," he said. "They all shift." But Lena knew. These weren't structural. They were fractures in the seal. She began reinforcing the symbols. Chalk, ash, salt. Rituals from the second journal. It helped. But the cracks kept growing. A child appeared outside her building. No one knew where he came from. He didn't speak. Just stood near the bushes, watching the window where she wrote. When Lena finally approached him, he handed her a single sheet of paper. It read, "They've started again. Somewhere else. Another listener has heard." She looked up. The child was gone. But across the street, in the reflection of the glass door, stood a woman watching her, wide-eyed, pale, whispering something soundless. Lena understood. It had begun again. The next morning, Lena checked her bookshelf. One of the books she hadn't touched in years, a hollowed-out novel she used to hide spare keys, was ajar. Inside it, instead of keys, lay a folded piece of parchment. It was old. Brittle. Ink faded like breath. She opened it carefully. "Memory is a vessel. You are cracked." She dropped it. The hollow book slammed shut on its own. She returned to the clearing that night. The ground where she'd burned the book was still blackened, but something had been left behind, a trail of scorched earth that led to a small stone altar she hadn't seen before. It bore her name. Lena, listener, sealed. Something flickered behind her. She turned. Nothing. But the wind shifted, carrying the softest whisper. "Come back." The altar had a hatch. She hadn't noticed it before. It blended into the stone, but now it pulsed with faint heat, like breath beneath skin. She opened it. A stairwell spiraled downward, carved from the stone itself. As she descended, the air grew still, not stale, not musty. Just waiting. Torches lit themselves as she passed. Symbols lined the walls, the same she had seen in the journal and carved on the bones. The deeper she went, the more familiar it felt. Until she reached the final chamber. A black door stood there. Unmarked. No knob. Just the sound of faint knocking. From the other side. In the walls were journals, similar to hers, bound in varying states of decay. Some names she recognized. Most she didn't. Each one bore a mark, the listener's sigil, etched in silver, fading with time. A pedestal rose in the center of the room. Atop it sat a quill and a blank book. As she approached, the quill lifted itself, hovering. The door knocked again. Lena placed her hand on the book. The page turned. A line wrote itself. One more listener. One more memory. She approached the black door. The knocking stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, a click. The door opened just an inch. Cold air rushed out. Whispering. Singing. But not in menace. In invitation. She should have turned back. But Lena stepped forward. And the door opened wider. The space beyond the door was not a room. It was a corridor, long, narrow, pulsing with a soft red light that didn't seem to come from any visible source. The floor was smooth stone, but warm beneath her feet. The air smelled like burnt parchment and damp wood. Along the corridor, shapes moved just out of sight. Not figures exactly, but fragments, limbs, whispers, glimpses of forgotten dreams that fled when she tried to focus on them. Every few feet, she passed another door. Each one marked with a different symbol. Each one humming at a different frequency. And then came the final door, marked not in ink, but in her handwriting. It was already open. The room beyond was circular, domed, and silent. In its center was a single object, a high-backed chair made of blackened wood and rusted nails. Upon it sat a figure that looked exactly like Lena. But not. Its face was stretched, its eyes wider than they should be, its fingers longer, curled inward as if clutching air. It turned its head slowly when she entered. "You made it," it said in her voice. "Who are you?" Lena whispered. "I'm the echo. The version of you that listened too long." It stood and stepped forward. "You opened the door. Now you must decide what to do with it." The walls shook. The dome cracked. The corridors beyond screamed in a language older than sound. The echo self reached for her. "You can end it. Become the seal. Or let them come through." Lena looked into its eyes, hollow, infinite. She stepped backward. Then forward. Then into the throne. The echo screamed. The throne accepted her. And in a blinding burst of heat and silence, the corridor shattered into black dust. Lena fell to her knees in the clearing. Morning birds were chirping. The sun rose over the treetops, innocent and bright, as if nothing had changed. But Lena felt the change inside her. A silence where once there had been knocking. A stillness where once there had been dread. She had sealed it. Not just the corridor, not just the book, but herself. Her body, her mind, had become the barrier. She was no longer the listener. She was the seal. Lena awoke in the clearing. She did not remember falling asleep. There were no sounds. No whispers. No pressure behind her eyes. Just wind in the trees. She walked home slowly. She didn't look back. In the following days, her phone stopped recording static. The book stayed sealed. The cracks in the wall did not grow. And when 3:17 came again, there was only silence. But Lena listened anyway. Because that was the cost of remembering. Lena remained in the clearing until the light faded. Something had changed in her. Something final. She no longer feared the silence. She inhabited it. When she placed her hand on the blackened earth, she felt the heartbeat beneath it, distant, weak, but there. Whatever she had sealed wasn't destroyed. Only dreaming. She stood and whispered into the wind. "Sleep longer this time." And the wind whispered back. "Until someone listens again." Weeks later, a package arrived at Lena's door. Inside, a cassette tape. Unlabeled. She found an old player at a thrift store and sat on her kitchen floor to listen. The voice was tired. Weathered. "If you're hearing this, you did it. You carried the weight. You sealed the corridor. But know this, the knock always returns. Maybe not to you. Maybe not in your lifetime. But it seeks. Always. A pause. Tell no one. Warn no one. For warning is listening." The tape ended with 3 knocks. Lena moved away from Grenton. She found a cabin in the mountains. Sparse, quiet. Surrounded by snow and pine. There, she started writing again, not journals, but stories. Fiction. Or so she told herself. She kept the book sealed in a case of salt and iron under the floorboards. She dusted the seals weekly. Lit candles on the anniversary of the knock. And she waited. Not in fear. But in readiness. She was no longer just a listener. She was the keeper. One night, as she sat by the fire writing, she heard something familiar, the sound of footsteps on fresh snow. She stood slowly and approached the door. There, on the porch, stood a girl no older than 10. Pale. Barefoot. Holding a notebook. "I heard it," the girl said, eyes wide. Lena looked past her, the trees were silent, still. "How many knocks?" Lena asked. The girl held up 3 fingers. Lena nodded. "Come in." Years passed. The whispers became softer. The memories more distant. Lena grew older, but never frail. Never forgetful. Every year, on the night of the first knock, she lit a single candle in the clearing. She left no offerings. Spoke no words. Silence was its own message. But this year was different. At 3:17 a.m., the candle flickered out. And far off in the woods. Knock. 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 The end.